Hello, everybody. So I'm Andrew from LDA Research, and as you know, we're keen to support action and advocacy for rare diseases. And you hopefully also know that February the 28th is Rare Disease Day, where organizations and individuals from all over the world get together in a series of events, both real and virtual, to raise awareness and funding for rare disease support and research. Now, one of those individuals is my guest today, Taylor Coffman. Hi, Taylor. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm great. Happy to talk to you, Andrew.
Okay, now we first spoke to Taylor almost exactly a year ago. I think it was the 11th of January on 11th January 2024. And she impressed me and the rest of us as one of the most active and upbeat people that we've met in this arena, despite the fact that she suffers from a rare disease herself. And that's something she writes about regularly in her blog, more of which later on. So now that another year has rolled around, we thought it was appropriate to catch up with her again. So Taylor, tell us what's been happening with you since we last spoke.
Oh my gosh. Well, okay, so I talked to you when? Remind me one more time.
11th of January 2024.
January 2024. Oh my gosh. So since January 2024, I think that was before my article came out in the Huffington Post.
Okay.
And so I'd written sort of an article about how I had advocated for myself in the ICU and that sort of journey. I was in the process of editing, I think, when we talked last, and it dropped early February in Rare Disease Month, and it went to number one on Apple News.
Wow.
It was the number one article, which was sort of, I mean, I almost couldn't believe it was real. I had all of a sudden an influx of friends just sharing it, and people thought perhaps it was like, oh, my algorithm loves Taylor, but my husband at the time was actually across the pond as well, and he checked his phone there and folks around him, and there I was in everyone's Apple device.
All right.
It was pretty incredible. We were like, it was like the number one article for most of the day, and ahead of Biden and the NFL a week before our Super Bowl. So it was pretty astounding. And I think what really resonated with people is this idea that we play a role in our own healing and healthcare. And I had, credit to my doctors, I had geniuses on my team. Geniuses. I would say upwards of 20 of them. But, sometimes even geniuses have a hard time communicating with each other. And that was one of my struggles. And I think people with rare disease often have multidisciplinary care, is sort of what we term it, where I had multi-organ failure. I had a blood disorder, and then I had just had a baby. So I had a fetal maternal medicine team, a cardiologist, a nephrologist. I was suffering from all, I'm getting a thumbs up, which I sort of joke that there's like a ghost in my Zoom that agrees with me whenever I'm saying something that is
Yeah, there
pretty,
must be because it's not me. So that was really
yeah.
surprising.
But so essentially I just had this huge team and I knew they cared. I knew they were on top of it as much as they could, but it just felt like I'd woken up from this coma and an induced coma that they put me in after a really dramatic hypoxia episode. It's my lungs because I was having kidney failure and my lungs were filling up with fluid and oxygen was not adequately getting to my brain. And so I was out for a few days. And when I got up and sort of had my first sessions with all my doctors when I was fully cognizant, it just felt like there was a lot of different plans, a lot of different ideas. But I sort of worked for a long time as a project manager. And I know what it's like to work across teams. And I was like, these folks, as much as they're like working their butts off to save me, they're maybe not communicating as effectively as they should be. So I sort of, at that point, I had no more, what we say in America, F's to give. I was like, I had to get home to my baby. And I was
Yep.
just like, I just really don't, I think I'm like in a one act play here, people coming in, everyone sort of saying different things. And it just feels a bit confusing. And so I had one doctor God bless him. He was one of the lead doctors on my fetal maternal medicine team. He got everyone organized around a text chain. I often say a text chain saved my life. And then
Okay.
they figured out like a system for caring for me, a rotating system. And I would say after that stint in the ICU, I did not go back to the ICU after that. Now, was I out of the woods? Not really, but they had sort of had a path for my care that was much more cohesive, because I would say also too, I for the doctors listening, I had sort of a battle and a multi-front battle where my body was also it also had sepsis, so I needed this immunocompromising drug, but I also had a extremely severe case of sepsis. So they organized their care around getting the sepsis under control and then coming back to the disease and keeping my kidneys stable. And luckily, I think about 3 weeks after that, I was lucky enough to head home. And
Right.
so going back to the what have I been doing since then? So that article came out. I was happy to be able to do a keynote speak at my disease conference, which was super powerful. It was so amazing to get to meet. They almost feel like relatives. It's sort of a strange thing, you're like, I don't know you, but we feel like so
Sure.
connected.
Sure.
More articles. That article was also put in BuzzFeed. So we had kind of we were featured in today.com. It was kind of a busy year of trying to get the word out about patient advocacy, but also just, connecting with patients even one-on-one. Even today, I have patients message me and we text back and forth, and
Okay.
it can be a little overwhelming, but it's, I feel like after that experience, fundamentally, Andrew, like I just was like, I was sort of sent back here for a reason, and maybe this is it.
Okay, right. Well, you brought together a particular set of skills and a particular experience, and you've capitalized on, no, not capitalized. I don't mean it like that, but you've made the best of it. Yeah, you've really used those things. Interesting to understand a little bit about what you said there. So you talked about that one physician who really kind of took charge of, and put together the text change. But what was it that you did that kind of catalyzed that, do you think?
Well, in that particular instance, and I think even after that, I just became a part of the care. I
Okay.
became part of, I think before that, I was sort of just riding the wave of this experience quite passively. If anyone can understand that,
Yeah.
there's a lot of medical terms. There was a lot of like confusion, things way over my pay grade. And when that happened, sort of noticing like communication gaps, the things that I knew to be true
Yeah.
about the situation, and to just not be afraid to know. And this is what I tell people, the power dynamic is that you are like the CEO essentially of your care.
Okay.
Your body, I don't, I mean, I think a lot of CEOs don't know how to program a website, but they can have the vision. A lot of CEOs don't know how to do a lot of the things the people on their teams do, but
Yeah.
they have the vision. They have, and I think I was really trying to inspire my team to work at the top of their license, essentially. And that's a term I get from and actually I have her book up here. If I can find it, Susanna Fox. You all should talk to her. She wrote Rebel Health, and
Yeah.
there's and I was sort of doing it without even knowing it. It was just my personality. I think for me the goal was get home to your kid. I had things to do. I could not die, and so at that point I just used my voice, and I
Mm.
used my voice the week later. I had you know symptoms of uremia coming in, and I knew something was different. I didn't know what was happening, but I was sure to be more on the team as far as like knowing my symptoms, keeping track. And I also know, look, I get it, like you want to escape that experience, and there's a lot of drugs painkillers that will help you do that, but for me it was really important that I talked to my nursing team and my doctors to say, I need to be alert. I
Yeah.
need to be able to know what's happening. So let's come up with a pain care system here that allows me to be part of the decision making, that allows me to be part of the team, essentially.
Okay. Okay. All right. Fantastic. And how has your health been over the last year? Have you had any more hospitalizations or?
Unfortunately, yes.
Ah,
It's
okay.
interesting. Every time I go back to a doctor for something, I sort of joke I'm not a freshman patient anymore. So my
Yeah.
experience of going back to the doctor is a much more my voice is in the process from the minute I get in. I had, and I about over here in the States in the Thanksgiving weekend, we had lots of activities going on, holiday things, but I had felt some abdominal pain. And I know for many, especially women listening, abdominal pain is not incredibly rare for us,
Sure.
when you have a uterus and it can be kind of a just part of life.
Right.
And I had for my first round at the hospital 4 abdominal surgeries. So my body has not been the same since, but I was feeling pain. It was getting worse. I'm a big fan of sometimes it's hard even for like I know I'm tough now in a way that I did not know before. But even I'm like, oh, do I really want to like get my husband up in the middle of the night to drive to an ER. I have a baby. It's the middle of the night. No one can watch her. She's going to have to come. Well, baby, she's 2 now. She's about
Yeah.
to turn 3.
Oh,
But
wow.
I'm just like, you're weighing all those decisions. And I'm a big fan of like a nurse help 24-hour helpline. We called one just to get like a gut check. And she was like, go.
Okay.
Uh, went and I didn't wait very long in the waiting room. They sent me right back because turns out I had from my 4 abdominal surgeries, the scar tissue from those surgeries were cutting off blood flow to different sections of my intestines. So it was pretty much like an emergency surgery that morning, and spent a few days in the hospital. So I sort of joke, but it's not really a joke. I feel like once you sort of buy a ticket to this carnival as a rare disease patient, you never know what ride you're gonna find yourself on. This had nothing to do with my disease specifically, but it had to do with the sort of fallout that disease caused. Luckily, I have a great team at my hospital, and, I was able to get home within the week and, healing up and things are good. But, it was just also a reminder, even in that instance, there were lots of times where I remember at one point I felt like, my pain management was not working for me. And I really was an advocate for them to get that right because there's all sorts of things we need to do as patients. Sometimes you're being charged with ambulating, you want to make sure you start walking, and if you don't have the proper pain management,
Right.
you need to help them do their jobs and you need them to help you do yours. And so it was a lot of advocating in that sense. And
Hmm.
and luckily I am doing great. I'm doing great. Now what
Right.
just we're talking at the end of January here, so doing great.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So when, as you said, you've got you've become much more widely known in the area now due to your articles and so on. So when other patients get in touch with you, what sort of thing, particularly with regard to advocacy, what sort of things are they, what advice are they asking for, and what kind of advice are you able to give them?
Yeah, well, it really runs the gamut. I think a lot of people find me initially when they're likely in the hospital. I get a lot of people messaging me and just being like, we're, either it's the patient or the family. And,
Okay.
they're just like, we found you on the internet. Like, please let us know resources, things like that. So there's always a bit of, at first, just like trying to get them the 101 of a disease that's super complicated. I
Okay.
have atypical hemolytic uremic syndrome, also known as complement mediated thrombotic microangiopathy. It's, I often say like this is when that seventh grade biology class that you forgot about is, if you're not sure what a protein does, you need to get like studied up fast.
Okay.
So the most initial things I'm sending are like resources, but also hope. I think that's something that I provide to folks. I think the way I would say a lot of people did get better faster than me. A lot of people had, situations that weren't as severe as mine, But there's something about the way I think, as I've shared my journey, which is not without its own complications, actually, being this open about a disease journey has its own challenges, especially when it comes to privacy and,
Sure.
any job I apply for, if someone Googles me, they're going to be like, oh, she's got a rare disease. How's that going to work out?
Oh,
But
right. Yeah. Good point.
but I would say my role as an advocate for people, it far outweighs, the challenges that I go through, in that arena.
Right.
And then it's like, even this morning, a woman messaged me about vaccinations and just sort of like wanting to know like what I typically get and what's my protocol, things that are of that nature. Now, there's also really good disease resource groups that I always send people to because I only know my experience,
Right.
even though this is a rare disease, there's so many experiences. And I do think some of the most important health conversations are happening outside of the doctor's office
Okay.
about pathways to care, quality of life, the choice to stay on a medication that's got terrible side effects. Patients are in communities, sort of checking each other's notes all the time, and I think that that's a very, and they're not. I mean, this is like a pro science group too. It's not an anti doctor group, but oftentimes, people go, well, I've been told this protocol. What labs are you getting? You
Yeah.
know, sort of double checking the path of care just to sort of say, is this the path? Is this the most efficient way?
Right.
I actually sort of something to celebrate. I had my best kidney lab last week that I've had since having the baby. And I post it for people so they can sort of know that 3 years later you can still be healing, which is
Yeah.
pretty incredible. And, a lot of times people are like, "Okay, well, what was your dialysis plan? Like, how often did you test your labs? What was your nephrologist track?" And even I consulted other nephrologists, when I had, and I always hit plateaus, and I think,
Right.
uh, reaching out and leaning on communities is a powerful, powerful tool.
That's interesting. Um, yeah, that's certainly something we've found in talking to other sufferers of rare diseases. Definitely, makes a big difference if you can just, even if you just talk to one other person. I think it makes a huge difference to how you feel about your situation because it can feel incredibly isolating, can't it? Um, You said one thing that I was wanting to pick up on, which is, learning about, what is a protein? So how important do you think it is to, kind of educate yourself about your disease, your condition, and, what causes it and what can be done about it?
Well, what I say, and I'm very open with doctors about this too. This is sort of my message to the doctors too.
Okay.
We are all going to hop on Google. All
Sure.
of us.
Right.
We are Googling and we are looking up our disease. That's just a fact. And if any doctor says, don't go on Google, you're crazy. Like,
Right.
we are gonna hop on Google. We're gonna look. So just make it a part of the information path. So when I talk about there's a healing path and then there's an information path. For doctors, I often say, like, when something happens to me at the doctor's office, I'm going to be Googling this. Where do you want me to go?
Okay.
What resources do you want me to look at? And even when I write things, I often have, I now have doctor friends, which is so lovely. And I often say, like, take a look at this. Is this check out for you? I think online resources are the path because a lot of times, especially folks like me, we're not going to go to the library, so we're going to get home and we're going to start Googling and we're going to look up resources and we're going to learn that way. Now, I will say a lot of resources are often above our heads. There's a lot of studies that I'll read and I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna have to read this like 5 times and Google all these terms. But that's when your doctor comes in and I sometimes take things to my doctor and I'm like, can you translate this for me? What does this mean?
Okay.
And I guess I've always been a curious person. So I'm very much a seeker of information.
Right.
And so I'm often, on going to, like, we have a foundation for my disease. They often share information. Even they sometimes actually are like writing above my, like, I got a theater BA, but I have a craving to understand what's going on. And I encourage folks, like, if you find something on the internet, you don't understand it, don't just stop there. Go and ask your doctors or resources, but also these online groups. They're often people who are looking for the same information and sharing the same findings, especially if it's a new study coming out, things like that. There's
Right.
especially too, it's like headlines, like sometimes these studies are really important to know about, and you're just like,
Oh,
I don't have access. I don't have the login to this,
right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I hear what you're saying. Understood. Okay. One thing you've said in the past, and I don't know whether you're still doing it, are you? You said you volunteered at a hospital, visiting patients and advocating for patients. Are you still doing that?
Yeah, well, when I went to the hospital, I literally was on the same floor that I volunteer on. I took a month off because also I was told to basically take a month off physically because I was healing abdominally.
Okay.
I still have to do my physical therapy, but once I start that process, I'll head back. I think it's a really rewarding, so rewarding experience. And there's something about, look, I think people volunteer for all sorts of different reasons. And for me, it is a hands-on experience of what I do online, but it's much more like personal. Like I mean, I think in this instance, I'll say oftentimes patients give back to me more than I give to them. Um, there's a lot of times that they inspire me with their strength. And oftentimes, oh, sorry, you can cut this part. My husband's playing every time we get a delivery.
Okay.
My sweet alerter dog likes to share. But essentially, walking into these rooms, and it's a lesson in the unexpected. I never know, I only get given, because of certain privacies and things like that, I only get given their name, their doctor, and their age.
Okay.
And so when I go in, I don't know what I'm going to encounter. Plenty of times, honestly, a lot of times people are asleep,
Right.
and I creep right back out behind the curtain. But there's a lot of people, and I go on a Tuesday morning when I know a lot of folks are alone and their families can't always be with them because they're at work. And I just hold space and help them navigate the hospital experience because there's a lot to learn about that experience. I try to assuage stress about, a lot of people come in with, especially in the States, stress about cost and resources around that. You just get a lot of people not only worried about their bodies, but worried about how going home is going to be like. And so I'm happy to be there with folks. And I've just witnessed such meaningful, so many meaningful scenes of healing. And one time, tell a very quick story. A husband was dealing with some brain things, and the wife thought that he didn't remember a lot of their relationship.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden, he wanted to share with me about his wedding. And she just starts crying, and she was like, I just didn't think he remembered.
Oh,
Or,
wow.
it's just, and I was like, just so grateful to be there at these, like, truly meaningful moments in a person's life.
Yeah. Yeah. I
As I
think
say, we will all be patients. And I
sure.
say over and over again to remind folks that some of us go earlier than others, but we will all be patients. And this is part
Mm,
of the human story. And I am grateful to be there for people on the days that maybe life is difficult, but I
okay.
find it a privilege.
All right. That's great. That's great. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and I know it's something that's kind of close to your heart, is the female experience of well, not just rare disease, but diagnosis, dealing with healthcare professionals, all of those kinds of things. Tell me some of your thoughts around that area, would you?
Um, well, I think that to ignore the reality of unconscious or conscious bias is to ignore uh, a great deal of the factors around diagnosis. And I think it's not unknown to doctors that if you have an X chromosome, you will as women do, the extra X chromosome, that you will be likely someone who will have a likelihood of an autoimmune disorder. Now, my disease is not autoimmune, but I call it like it's like the next door neighbor to autoimmune. It's a complement disease, and the
Okay.
complement helps the immune system. So it's very similar. But I do suffer, honestly, from vitiligo, which is one, and psoriasis. And that already occurred in me before this dramatic diagnosis.
Okay.
But I think that the factors are that even if doctors know that to be true, I think there's a lot of need for training around when a woman comes in talking about symptoms. And I can use my own experience as like I came into an ER talking about pains in my stomach. A woman having pain in their stomach, it's not always something that's going to flag. And in fact, I was reached out by a few folks that said, "Oh, I had the same thing. I went to the ER. I was sent home. I had to call 911 to be taken seriously," which is, you know, pretty extreme. I think even I asked at one point, like, should I have come in sooner? Did I wait too long? And the doctors around me were like, actually, you came in at the right time because that's your vitals were already being affected. So
Right.
there was
Okay.
no debate that I needed prompt care. Now, I do think something that I say often, that you can be stressed and correct about something wrong happening in your body. And I find that the stress is often the symptom, not the cause. Okay. So for example, and I feel and one of these times I'm sure all my doctors cringe when I tell stories like this because even the best sometimes they have so many patients, right? And I was in the hospitals around the end of my stay, and I was having a difficulty speaking, and I was having some tremors that were getting not better, like to the point that like it was pretty noticeable, and I was saying, this is getting worse, this is getting worse. I did have folks go, it's probably stress. And I remember thinking like, well, I was in a coma last week and had hypoxia the week before, and
Right.
didn't wake up from having a baby the week prior, and so I've been stressed. So,
Okay.
it's different. And then, sadly, I had to wake up one morning where I had essentially, and forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, toxic encephalopathy,
Right.
where my kidneys were not filtering my toxins and it was poisoning my brain. And then I got aphasia and then I couldn't speak.
Right.
And so it had gotten to this point. Now, had they listened to me on Tuesday instead of seeing me get as bad as it gets on a Friday, I probably could have gotten home out of the hospital sooner, frankly.
Uh-huh.
So, and the thing about it is, was I stressed? Correct. But I was also right. And I think that that's, truly a part of this sort of thing, that women are somehow more stressed. But I would say, like, yeah, I get stressed. I am stressed, but I'm also often right.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough. Yeah, understood. So, I mean, just to understand, I mean, do you think, I mean, you probably can't draw the parallel, but, a man in that instance, do you think that there would have been a tendency to take that more seriously? Is
Well,
that what we're saying at the heart of this?
I would say the data shows that, right?
Okay. Yeah.
The data shows that, and I have, I've written about this, and I will say sometimes I have brain fog, so I won't give you the exact numbers, but go to rarediseasegirl.com and you'll see I have them written out there. But essentially, if a man goes to a heart attack with a heart attack to an ER and a woman goes, men get treated more, they get treated faster
Right.
and more efficiently.
Right.
Uh, when we talk about pain, that's also something that seems to get taken more seriously with men. There's plenty of stats that show that women are sort of have to wait longer for care. And when we look at the realities of rare disease, right? A lot of times people are waiting for a diagnosis. Diagnosis takes so long. And the
Yeah.
reality is, I mean, rare diseases, yes, they're rare, but in the aggregate, they're not that rare. So, I
No,
think
indeed. Yeah.
I think the thing I urge doctors, is to, and I remember when this happened to me, and this is sort of akin to this sort of situation. I had a shoulder problem. Women in their 40s are often told like, "Oh, you probably have frozen shoulder." It's a
Right.
thing that happens to women. And I remember just being like, "Nah, something is wrong." I finally went to a rheumatologist because I was like, "Is it arthritis? What is this?" My medication also causes joint pain. And he just goes, "I believe you." And I just remember going, "Phew." You know,
Okay.
got me an MRI. Turns out I had totally torn ligaments in my
Oh,
shoulder.
wow.
It was
Okay.
not going to get better without PT or some, intervention that was less than just having a frozen shoulder. So I will say this, like, yes, we could be wrong, but at least just make sure because
Yeah, right. Okay. So you've obviously
time is
yes, you've thought about this a lot. What do you think can be done to try and address that disparity?
good question. I do think unconscious bias training
Yeah.
is real, and just the awareness of it
Okay.
helps. Um, and honestly, I and this is a stat too that's very true. Um, More women doctors. I'm
Yeah.
very pro women. The stats also show women surgeons have less fatalities than male surgeons. I don't know why this is the case, even adjusted for population.
Okay.
So I do encourage women to get into the medical field and don't discount it as a path forward because and it can be hard, women have all, sort of even I, in the creative field, like I just never thought I just was like, "Oh, I'm not a director." And it was like, "Why did I think that? That's crazy. I could totally be a director. I'm in creative fields. I was just always the actor, and now
Yeah.
I do more writing." But like, why did I not consider it? So I always say, women, please, please, but also too, like women in leadership is always something I'm pro. Please run for
Yeah.
office. Please, please, get in the medical field, um,
Right.
because I do
Okay.
think the more diversity you have on your team matters.
Right. 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 Yeah. I hear you. Coming back to your writing. So you talked about the article that really kind of took off. But I know you also have you write regularly on Substack, I think. Is that right? The Rare Disease Girl is the handle
That's
that you use.
correct.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
right. I mean, I haven't read too many of those, but I have read a few. And what struck me always with those is the honesty that you bring to it. And you talked before about privacy, but you're perfectly happy to share the good and the bad, which I think is great. Um, what do you get from writing?
That's a good question. I think for me, previous to all of this, I was not much of a writer. I did write. I had some plays produced and things like that because I was, an artist in that way.
Uh-huh.
I wrote at work. I wrote copy. I often edited copy. But I didn't really like have, I think, and this is the truth, something important to say.
Okay.
I had some truths about, my experience, but the realities are, I remember when I started writing, it was mostly screenplays, but I remember being in a dialysis chair And here I was sort of I was on dialysis about 9 months before I got to graduate, but mind you, I didn't know how long I was gonna be stuck there, you know? I
Right.
was like, "Is this it? Is this it until someone gives me a kidney?"
Right.
And I found the experience to be, just very, like, if anyone knows the dialysis process, it's almost like going on a flight, except for you don't get to go to the bathroom if you're a woman.
Right.
So you're attached to this machine for about 3 hours. You bring your luggage, you bring blankets, snacks, water, all the things, and you're sort of stuck there until they take you off the machine. And I, at first, would try to sleep, but I found that I was not very good at sleeping in dialysis. It was just not a place I felt a lot of people feel comfortable. They want to sleep it away, frankly, and I understand. But for me, I had a hard time sleeping there. A lot of alarms going off, frankly.
Yeah.
Then I watched a lot of Food Network and and TCM, the Turner Classic Movie Channel. But one day I just started being like, if I'm going to sit here, I should do something with my time. At first, it was like just honestly the realities of making all the phone calls I didn't have time to make when I was at home, dealing
Right.
with insurance approvals, disability, things like that. And then I just started bringing my laptop. And at one point got this inspiration to write about this experience, to write a book about this experience while I was in it. And
Hmm.
so I started writing a book. And as anyone knows, the process of writing a book is it's a long process. And I sort of got a little the purpose of the book was to sort of help people who because I didn't know of a book that was going to help me in the situation. So I was like, well, I'll just write it.
Okay.
And I had a very like specific tone that I wanted. I didn't want it to be too like it's inspirational, but I wanted it to be real.
Okay.
I wanted it to be practically helpful, and I wanted it to be funny.
Okay.
It was really important because honestly, when you're sick, uh, the idea of reading a book can sometimes feel exhausting. So I wanted the experience of writing something for patients and anybody, frankly, to be a process that's easy to just check in on. Like I wanted it to be an easy read. I wanted people to laugh, and I wanted people to feel supported. And about 6 months later, I was off dialysis back at work, and I was like, "I just don't know how long it's gonna take for someone to read this." Like, how the idea of publishing a book can take years unless you're
Right.
self-publishing, but it's still a long process.
Sure.
And so I started the Substack as a way to sort of, uh, fast track that community, aspect that I wanted to build. I wanted to start getting in people's inboxes and being there for people in a way that felt more immediate. Now, I still have my book. I'm still working on
Yeah, I
my
was
book.
just going to ask what's the status of that now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we're working on so I have a lovely agent and I did get an offer for publishing, but we're sort of doing the shop around kind of thing,
Okay.
seeing what's possible. But it was really rewarding because she also had some situations come up when she had the birth of her children. So there was I feel like this was something that connected. She was like, I knew in 3 pages that I wanted to represent this. And so
Okay.
I was really encouraged. And
Great.
so I do think there is just something about my candid voice that that people like, perhaps, trying I don't take myself too seriously when I write,
Right.
um, but I do try to be honest,
Uh-huh.
and it's
And yeah, that's great. But really, what I was trying to get at, what does it do for you, the writing?
oh, it gives me purpose. I
Ah,
mean,
okay.
before all of this, I didn't have a purpose beyond my own ambitions, right?
Okay.
Like my life was a drive toward ambition, but it was shallow ambition.
Okay.
Whereas now I really, really am driven to help people. So it gives me purpose.
Okay.
I would say if you were my therapist and we were digging into my psyche, it does work as a sort of what I would call exposure therapy. I
Hmm.
mean, I definitely went through a significant amount of traumas
Hmm.
that we all go through, and
Sure.
this is my version of revisiting those moments, those sort of scary moments in time, reflecting upon them,
Yeah.
existing in them again in my mind, um, and then also growing from them and allowing me a level of, as we talked about last time, post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
So that is extremely rewarding. And I do think, there's something about the writing process that feels like a channel for sure.
Hmm.
And the creative process, often people talk about that. And I
Sure.
think, I don't get to I try not to get too self-conscious about it as I'm writing. I just sort of let it go and see where it takes me. And I think that that's been incredibly rewarding for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I understand. I'm just certainly from my own experience. I mean, I do a little bit of writing myself, and what I found is it's a way of understanding my own thoughts, really, because we often have a lot of thoughts going on in our head, but we don't kind of tie them down. Whereas actually writing and having to put a beginning, middle, and end on it really helps to sort those out in your mind. Anyway, it's not about me. So
No, talk about you.
what's
Great.
in your future now? What are the plans for the future? You going to carry on with the Substack?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Uh-huh.
I will say candidly, it's been a lot of recovery the last month, and I was churning out like 2 essays a week, pretty
Mm,
much for
yeah,
about 3 years. So, and then when I sort of took a break over the holidays. Sorry. Hey Zach, do you mind closing that door a second? So I took a break over the holidays, and then I have so many planned in the new year. And it can be hard to find time to do it.
sure.
I often have a pretty full plate between I do, work as a project manager, and I have a well, no, she's almost 3,
Yeah.
but definitely more articles to come. I just did a whole edit on my book again after sort of getting some notes. So I'm definitely always writing. And I'm excited. I have a lot of kind of interesting articles I want to talk about, or not
Hmm.
talk about, or things I want to talk about in the next year.
Right.
Um, and also, I'm always talking about my life and the challenges of
Sure.
living with this chronic disease. And also, too, a big thing that's really a big passion for me is, especially in the States, is access to quality healthcare,
Okay.
uh, which is, is a true challenge. A lot of people with rare diseases, who have the means, don't always stay here
Right.
uh, because because you can go bankrupt, frankly, with a disease here. It's really quite you sort of I sort of say to my husband, we live a little too close to the social safety net. My drug is one of the most expensive drugs. The copay itself, just the copay, is
Hmm.
about 9K every 8 weeks. I'm not sure what that is in pounds, but it's a lot.
That's a lot.
It's
Yeah.
probably about 10 in pounds. And then my labs alone, until Thanksgiving were $1 million. And that's just labs. That's not the care.
Yes.
Um,
Right.
my infusions themselves each time without, not copay, but the actual cost of the care is about $300,000 every 8 weeks.
Wow.
So this is something I think in the next year that I feel deeply passionate about speaking out about and finding. I sort of joke. I think when JJ goes to elementary school, I would not be surprised if I run for office or something. I do think that this is a big problem.
Right.
And even between insurers here, the discrepancies between costs are wildly dramatic, and it's just really, really a problem. So,
Yeah.
I don't think any systems may be perfect, but I do think uh, no one should go bankrupt because they have a rare disease.
No. No. Sure. Yeah, it's interesting, comparing that to the UK experience. I mean, obviously we have healthcare that's free at the point of care, as they say. But there are limitations on that, of course. I mean, it sounds like nirvana, but it's not. The health system is incredibly overstretched. And a lot of stories in the press right now about waiting times in A&E and all that kind of thing. So yeah, in some ways we got it lucky, but certainly with expensive drugs there are limitations. There are some drugs which are just not available unless you're prepared to pay.
Yes, yes. Well,
Exactly the same as you guys.
India just got my drug access. My drug's been around over 10 years, I think.
Right.
They just got access to my drug.
Okay. Yeah.
So so it's I do realize that this is a problem that everyone's trying to solve. But I do think for example, in our household, we have three different healthcare. So my child is on what we call Medi-Cal, which I think is very similar to what your system would
Yeah.
be, where you go and you wait a long time at an office, and she doesn't have any costs for her care.
Yeah.
But that's because they let her have that because she's a child, and
Sure.
you know. But for me, I have to pay like top notch, and
Mm,
it's
mm.
incredibly expensive. And so I think that that is a part of my advocacy that's, I think, to come when we talk about what's to come.
Right.
That's um
Well, I think we'd all like to see you running for office in some way, shape, or form. So I'm sure you'd be highly effective, and it would be it's going to be fascinating to watch your journey. Well, we've been talking for nearly an hour. This is brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure talking to you. I hope you've enjoyed it too.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate how you all elevate voices and try to, further the advocacy around rare disease. Again, we talked about it earlier. It The diseases themselves might be rare, but the
Yeah.
population of people with rare diseases is not that rare. And
Yeah, funny you should say that actually. I just boned up on that just before we came on air, as it were. Yeah, as you say, individuals suffering a particular disease, very few people. Add them all together, we're talking about 300 million people around the world who fall into that category of rare diseases. So that is a huge population. So it really does affect a lot of people. So Rare Disease Day and these advocacies and the work that you're doing, I think are really, really important, really, really important for those people. So once again, thank you so much for your time. It's been a total pleasure talking to you. And
thank you, Andrew.
I'm
Keep up the
sure
good
we'll
work.
see you again and we'll keep reading your Substack and all of that stuff. Thanks a lot.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much.